Hello, listeners. My name is Donna and I am a board-certified psychiatric and family nurse practitioner. Welcome to the Brighten Up podcast, where we pull up the shades and shine the light on mental health topics both affecting and improving the lives of families. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Thomas Osika, clinical psychologist, to discuss a very current and prevalent topic, the impact of video games on social development and interaction, specifically in boys. Dr. Osika, along with his wife, Dr. Gina Scarano, are the founders of Osika and Scarano Psychological Services in upstate New York. Since 1999, Osika and Scarano Psychological Services have been proud to offer mental and behavioral health services and substance abuse treatment services to adults, children, and teens. Their mission to provide personalized, high-quality care on an as-needed or preventative basis is executed with the practice's team of dedicated and experienced providers, passionate about improving and maintaining the mental health of their clients. The practice works together to serve individuals and families addressing mental health needs across the lifespan. Outside of work, Dr. Osika enjoys exercising, playing racquetball, hiking in the Adirondacks, as well as being a self-declared avid Buffalo Bills and New York Yankees fan. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Osika. It's a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure.
To be talking with you. Current trends surrounding video games. Obviously, they're quite popular. They really have become an integral part of our modern society, with an estimation of children between the ages of 8 and 17 spend an average of 1.5 to 2 hours per day playing video games. And certainly they've evolved over the years from the 80s when we played Atari and the pixelated games that maybe if we had a friend over, they could join us. They're now highly immersive and realistic. Certainly the popularity, not only in the United States, but the popularity has increased all over the world. And with this increase, there have been concerns raised by mental health professionals like yourself, as well as parents and educators, that they may be impacting the social development and interaction in children and adolescents. So my first question for you is, how do you define social development on a normal scale? And how do you think video games might affect this process in children, particularly boys?
Social development, to me, the development or growth of your ability to establish relationships, whether it's with your peers, with your parents, with adults, teachers, just developing those skills, whether it's starting a conversation, maintaining a conversation, developing empathy, being able to see other people's perspectives, reading body language, tone of voice, all those types of things. One of the best ways we develop that, just like almost everything else we get good at, is practice. The more you do it, the more you're interacting with people, the more skilled you are. Understanding tone of voice, whether it's settling conflicts, shared enjoyment of things. And I think, video games to me are kind of a double-edged sword with that. For some kids, I think they're actually pretty helpful. Kids that are shy, really socially anxious, reluctant to approach other people, lacking confidence, things like that. It's a really nice way to have a shared interest with people and work together and be able to laugh and talk and have fun doing something. I think the concern comes more when there's a lack of balance, when the video game playing is outweighing the social interaction, where that's becoming more prominent part of your life, or you're just so isolated you're not getting those other experiences where you're having kind of real one-to-one or just in-person interactions with people. What we are finding is the more that kids isolate, the more anxious they get about engaging with other kids.
I can see how it might help just get a child's foot wet who might be a little trepidatious about social anxiety or being around other people, where they can inch into those types of interactions slowly. But I agree, if it becomes your only form of social interaction and isn't intermingled with other real life experiences or conversations, it can be hard to navigate when you have to step outside and you're forced to be face to face with somebody.
Oh, absolutely. I think anything that you develop confidence with, it's really through doing it. Even if you have an awkward social interaction with somebody or misinterpret something where you're interacting with somebody, you still learn from that. Situations where, geez, I wish I hadn't have said that. I'll handle it differently next time. Or I misunderstood what you meant when you said that. That look you gave me, I took it one way, you really meant it another. All those little things that you learn from when you're interacting face to face with people. You're not getting that when it's virtual.
That's a good point. Just body language and kind of seeing those little minor changes that might portray that somebody's upset or their feelings are hurt or that type of thing isn't as easy to come face to face with. So positives of the video games can be just for children who are naturally shy to use it as an introductory tool toward developing relationships and growing on that in person. And how about leadership or troubleshooting, working together if you have multi-players from different regions?
Well, I think it can be helpful in that regard. Of course, depending on what game that they're playing and how well everybody's interacting, planning, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. How do we want to work together to accomplish a certain goal? So I certainly think that there's value in that.
On the flip side, you referenced the content of the games. In your experience and the kids that you've worked with and interviewed, what have you come across, or what games maybe are you familiar with that would demonstrate having a positive versus a negative influence?
I can't say I'm terribly familiar with the games. The ones I'm most familiar with that involve more building, I think, are Minecraft, Roblox. I'm sure there's other games like that. Again, you're trying to kind of logically work through a problem. There's a process involved. You're planning. You're just kind of working together as a team. Yeah, I'm sure that there's some conflict involved at times, but I think those games and types of games have a greater chance for growth or working together.
And I think some of the games, can be pretty, on the flip side, talking about some potential negative influences. Some of them can be rather violent, aggressive, and overly competitive. When you couple that, I think, with our post-pandemic era where a lot of parents who had to pivot to working from home and kids weren't in school and needing to find that easy place for them to stay and be quiet. The video games really came through for that. Maybe in the technology was helpful in some instances for the points we've discussed, but in other areas, particularly with some of the games and the content, I think they've been a little bit detrimental with promoting things like violence and vulgarity, things along those lines.
Yeah, I did a little research, and 85% of the games out there are considered violent.
Are they really?
Shocking to me. Certainly have heard about the more popular ones like Fortnite, and there's other games like that, but I was amazed that there were that many. Well, what the research says about that, and of course it varies from kid to kid and how much you're playing, but it can desensitize kids to violence to some degree. When over and over again you're kind of exposed to this, especially if there's no balance where you're interacting with real people doing real things. But typically with both boys and girls, it's more of a decrease in pro-social behavior. That what a lot of the research is saying is that kids that are playing a lot of the more aggressive, violent video games are less likely to engage in more of the kind of altruistic behaviors. There's also some research out there just about changes in brain function, looking at frontal lobe activity, which frontal lobes are more or less the CEO of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
They're really involved with attention, planning. If I do this, then this will happen. They help regulate your mood, being depressed, being anxious. Since that area is so activated by the stress of playing some of these games, finding changes in just how the frontal lobes look, where kids' attention spans are decreasing, and there are some higher rates of depression and anxiety, things like that.
Sure. They're just used to that fight or flight mode, and it's hard to really reorganize and slow down enough to process information like homework or schoolwork. It's
Right. I mean, a lot of the games, you're always under stress. You're trying to not be killed or not get caught by the police or not have something bad happen. Our bodies just aren't meant for constant stress like that, especially developing brains aren't used to that. And it's hard to go from that to everyday life where there was always instant gratification or instant stimulation. And that transition can be really difficult.
Well, we have such a small amount of time in hindsight, where we have the flexibility of the brain muscles to absorb healthy behaviors and coping mechanisms and good relationships. And I think now with more people comfortable talking about mental health, it's wonderful that we're able to intervene as a brain isn't fully developed until I think they just upped it to 27. It was 25, I believe. And promoting good behaviors, but your strong wiring for the rest of your life, your hard wiring, I should say, with habits and things that you're exposing yourself to. I think in childhood, that can be difficult to reverse if you're not balancing it.
Absolutely. I think there's both biology involved and just learning.
Yes.
Where you learn that things are supposed to happen quickly. And if they're not exciting or grabbing your attention right away or onto the next thing, that can be a hard transition to make because sometimes you have to be patient and life doesn't always happen quickly. And that can be a tough thing for kids.
Oftentimes, I think that the best part is in the journey, right? Not always immediately getting exactly what you want at that moment or being in some, intense situation or happy situation. It's a process. Do you think that the video games and in this era of where we're hearing more about school violence, shootings, and what appears to be very cavalier, bringing lethal weapons into school and planning out how they're going to commit a crime? I mean, do you think that what do you think the correlation is between possibly those children and what we would classify as a video game addiction? Or is there actually now an official diagnosis for a video game addiction or criteria that?
My understanding with that is that it's being considered for the next diagnostic manual. A lot of the criteria that are being talked about are kids that are isolating more, spending less time with activities that are expected of them. So doing homework, older kids, working, interacting with their family, kids that aren't coming out of their room. We've had a few kids in the office actually that go to the bathroom as often as they should, as crazy as that sounds. They don't eat as much, totally consumed going on and playing the game. I think it crosses over from, hey, I'm having a lot of fun doing this to I can't live without this. I have to do this. Sometimes you get some really extreme reactions from kids when they can't play and they're expecting to be able to play. And these are in the more, extreme circumstances. Seeing an increase in depression and anxiety with impulse control, things like that. So I know there's a lot of the markers that are really being researched for a potential video game addiction. I know it's being talked about being added to the next diagnostic manual.
And it seems like if you have a genetic predisposition or you have a history of mental illness in your family or mood dysregulation, if introducing excessive gaming without balancing it out can really worsen a lot of those symptoms, not really being part of the solution if not balanced. I mean, I have had a few families who I've worked with where difficult home life situations, but they've actually been afraid to tell the child or the adolescent no. They're afraid of their reaction. They're going to become aggressive. They're going to throw things. It's very concerning for other siblings in the home, or maybe it's a single parent, grandparent raising them. And once you're there, it takes a pretty moderate, I think, intervention to back out of that. I've told some people, hey, turn off the internet, cancel it. It sounds somewhat drastic, but I think holding kids accountable for that behavior, or what would you say, seems to me, if it were to continue uninterrupted or not, continued into, say, late adolescence, early 20s, it would seem that the consequences to that behavior would really lead to maybe like going to jail or, being committing crimes and not being able to work or support yourself. Pretty serious consequences. So what do you tell parents or kids that are already over that threshold of they just can't live without the game?
Yeah, usually the first thing I'll tell parents before they even get to that point, if they're wondering about it, because sometimes they'll get asked that question, how much should you allow them to play? And I'll typically throw out an hour or two a day. A lot of it depends on what is the child, how well equipped are they, first of all? Are they coming from a really strong, kind of structured family background where there's not a lot of mental illness in their background? Or are they coming from homes that maybe aren't as structured or organized, or there's a more significant history either with the child or with the parents of some mental health concerns? And, in more extreme cases, is there any history of abuse or alcohol problems, things like that? So that certainly, plays some role. What's the kid bringing to the situation to begin with? And usually my feedback to parents is their behavior will let you know when it's too much and what they can handle. And if you start seeing behavior changes, if they're not keeping up with homework, all of a sudden you're getting calls from teachers, they seem more down, they're reluctant to join you for dinner, they don't want to do things with the family, they're seeing their friends less, things like that. Those are all pretty good indicators that it's probably getting to be too much. The more extreme cases where we've had a couple of those kids too, where parents are really walking on eggshells, it's, this kind of a monster they don't know what to do about. Really, there have been two approaches that we've tried. One is, like you said, just more or less ripping the Band-Aid off and just saying, we have to stop this. That's usually met with some pretty extreme reactions the first week or two. And it's a really test of the parents' ability to stick with it because, like you said, there's usually some pretty difficult behaviors involved. Typically, my feedback is if you're going to do this, you can't commit to it and then go back on it because you can't take it away for 2 days, then get really upset and then say, okay, you can play. Because at that point, they'll never take you seriously. But be prepared for it to get worse before it gets better. The other approach I've seen, rather than go, quote unquote, cold turkey, try to switch the games from a more violent game to a more thought-provoking, less violent game. So kind of step down, so to speak, in terms of the content. Because there is a line of thought out there that brain has at some point been primed for all of this action and you're taking it all away. And now kids don't know what to do. So it's almost, sounds like a terrible analogy, but like quitting smoking, going from a pack a day to half a pack a day. You're almost trying to slowly decrease the amount of stress and the amount of video game time rather than just doing it cold turkey. Kids don't necessarily like that either, but sometimes if they'll go along with it, that's an easier approach.
More of a weaning off process, which makes sense. There's still that there, but combining that with like a positive, like, hey, let's go to your favorite restaurant or let's go see this movie, or just takes parental, I think, buy-in and commitment to work through that. And maybe more early education, like health classes we have for kids early on in grammar school on a number of topics, including video games and what's a healthy balance in school curriculums.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, along with managing the video game addiction too, any good behavior plan has rewards to it as well. So when kids really are trying, when they really are compliant, there has to be some type of reinforcement for doing that because it is hard for them. If they've been playing that long and it's really kind of taken over their lives and you're taking that away, that's not an easy thing. So when you are getting cooperation or effort, you really want to capitalize on that and reinforce it and let them know how important that is to you and how much you recognize that. You want to really kind of foster that to keep it going. It's a very tricky thing for parents because the pandemic and more parents working from home and kids couldn't do a lot else anyway. It was so easy to have this right in the house, and this is how the kids are all talking to each other. So it was a very easy thing to slip into, and for some kids, it just escalated too much.
And it's easy to get one day goes into the next as a busy parent and managing a household and jobs, and probably we sit and eat dinner together maybe once or twice a week. It's the way it goes with sports schedules and just how it lines up. In fact, I ordered these organic meals that are already pre-cooked that, they're not frozen, but, 14 of them a week just makes it, a nutritious meal, but easy to grab on the go. But checking in, having guardrails, I think with kids, like you said, are they isolating? How many hours a day? Maybe setting a timer. I do ask my kids. I did not do this with our older ones because I really didn't know what I didn't know and had to come upon them playing video games or on social media late into the evening hours. But now I have checkpoints that bring in your remote controls, bring in your phones, like check-in time is at this time, and also like a midweek check on grades and homework assignments. Doesn't take very long, but just a good way to kind of peek into their world to make sure it's not becoming all consuming.
Absolutely. And, teenagers, as a rule, tend to start to distance themselves from their parents anyway. So they are in the rooms more. Their friends do become more important. So it gets to be more difficult. And a lot of the ways they're communicating with devices or with games. But just doing those check-ins, like you said, especially if there's some structure to it, is a really good thing. You know where they're at. They know that you still have some parameters in place and structures that they're operating under, and there's comfort in that as well for kids, and keeps you connected.
It is amazing to me that they can play and see each other and talk like they're on the phone. Just amazing how far we've come with technology. I mean, I know we're on this Zoom podcast, but really impressive. And, a lot of good can be created out of it too. But I think there's just a lot of challenges now in general, depending on background and opportunities available to kids. And if a parent themselves struggles with mental illness, like a woman who I'd spoken to over the summer, her kids did not go out of the house all summer because she really wasn't up to it. She was concerned too about their environment and the safety around where they lived and did not want to let the kids go out. So basically that was her go-to. So I think it would be nice to eventually maybe move toward having some more community support and even on a political level, have some intervention to kind of ride this wave with parents and counteract some of the propensity to just be on it too much as we look at all aspects of kids' mental health and the current trends.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've said to my wife a few times, and it sounds like such an old man take, but you don't see kids playing in the street anymore. Everything's very organized. My kids went through it too. They were always on some team that we were trucking them somewhere. They weren't just playing informal, games of basketball or street football or anything like that. It's everything. The adults kind of took a lot of it over. It's two things. One, it's more time you're not connected because you're dividing and conquering with the kids, and they're not also opportunities. I mean, some of those situations are the best ones to figure stuff out. If you disagree about a play that happened in a street football game, stand there and you figure it out. Those type of opportunities.
Yes.
That kids just don't get anymore. When you're split up like that too, and somebody has to stay at home, they're probably going to look for something like, on a device or a video game to play.
With my kids at a young age, if I had to go in to a grocery store or pick up a pizza, from the time they were 8 or 9, I would have them get out and do it and just practice having that conversation and expressing themselves. It wasn't always comfortable, but those are some small ways to foster that if everyone around you is busy, or because I'm sure you're seeing this too with our generation of kids now entering young adulthood and college or just graduating. It's a little bit of a learning curve to sit around a coffee table and have those face-to-face interactions. And it can be certainly scary for a lot of them, and they need just a little bit of coaching and support, but they respond really well.
They do. A lot of times they just need the opportunity, and everything we know about self-confidence is you can watch people do it and learn from it, and people can tell you can do it, but you really have to do it. That's where you get confidence from, even if you don't do it right the first time. So whether it's talking to somebody at a grocery store or making new friends or interacting with that teacher that you're worried about, those are all things that can be such confidence builders and breakthroughs once you get to do it.
There's no way past something than through it, I guess, right? You just have to kind of growth occurs outside of your comfort zone, one little step at a time. Or you build resilience by stacking up those achievements of pushing yourself toward doing something you're not entirely comfortable with.
Oh, absolutely. And I also think that even when you fail, just realizing that I didn't do well at this, but I'm okay, learning how to bounce back when
Yes.
something doesn't go right.
Like the Buffalo Bill. Right?
I think they've learned plenty of lessons. I think the learning hopefully is done soon.
Yes, I think so too. I really do. I have a very good feeling.
I hope you're right. In a lot of ways, kids haven't changed a whole lot either. If anything, we're seeing a little more anxiety, more attention concerns, but we've been doing this for about 25 years, and a lot of the stuff is pretty much the same. It just has different causes for it.
And when you say
Yeah.
a lot of it's the same, like what would be the same? That search for yourself and that safety and your footing in the world.
Like you said, trying to find yourself. Who am I? What am I about? What am I good at? What do I feel confident about? Getting more comfortable with your strengths, weaknesses, your appearance. School stressors, I think, are as big as ever. I think, if anything, we see kids now a bit more confused, maybe what they want to do. They're in their mid, junior, senior years and having less clarity. In a lot of ways, teenagers are the same. They just have different stressors these days.
You mentioned a little more anxiety and attention issues. That would make sense with, certainly the video game in excess playing, contributing to that. Do you feel statistically ADHD is on the rise, or at least seeking treatment is on the rise? I know it's a little bit of an offshoot to this question, or to our topic here this evening, but
Yeah, I believe the prevalence rate's around 14%. And I can tell you, just from what we see in the office, it feels that there are a lot more referrals for ADHD evaluations and autism evaluations. So a lot more parents concerned about kids' social skills. They're having more trouble establishing contact with their peers. There's more difficulty tolerating changes in their routine, sensory sensitivity, attention problems often are kind of comorbid with autism. So we're seeing a lot more of those types of referrals. Video games, I'm sure, are part of that. The pandemic played a fairly big role in that. It was a good stretch where kids weren't interacting, or when they were interacting, they had masks covering half of their faces. So they really didn't get good at reading expressions and things like that. The anxiety, I think, comes from a lot of sources, some of which we've talked about. Obviously, there's a lot more terrible news these days with what's going on in schools. And, I would say those are the areas, and a lot more, I guess, emotional lability, mood swings. Kids are a lot more reactive in a lot of ways, quicker to anger than they were in the past.
And I think maybe diet could be contributing to that too, just the food source, and just really there's no differentiation in days. You can go all week long with sports and activities, and not really having that designated time could be an off day for some people.
Yeah. How often, I can think of it with our own family, how often we're eating on the run.
Mm-hmm.
We were out till 8 or 8:30 for a baseball game. Let's go, grab some fast food on the way home. You just do it. I also think kids don't get a lot of activity at times outside of those structured situations. And, if you want to tie it back to video games, if you're spending 4 or 5 hours at a time playing a game, you're probably not eating the best food and you're not moving a whole lot.
Right. And
that doesn't contribute to a very good mood either.
Absolutely. And on a positive note, as we come to a close with our conversation, you've touched a few times on one of the big side effects of excessive gaming or gaming addiction is having difficulty forming intimacy, or having empathy, where, like you said, you're able to feel another person's feelings or identify with them. What are some recommendations you would give to parents, teachers, children that would foster empathy? What are some activities do you think that they could incorporate to build that a little bit?
Really encourage kids to get involved with clubs, after school activities, encourage them to try things. And if they see like clubs or activities they like, they're going to be around kids with a similar interest. In terms more of counseling group counseling. Again, talking with other kids. I think that's really helpful. Seeing the other kids are a lot like you are in a lot of ways. But I think from the parent perspective, it's really just keeping an eye on how much are they playing and how often do I see their friends? How often are they going to their friends' houses? How often are they playing a pickup game somewhere or going to the mall together or out doing things together? And when you see that starting to slip, don't be afraid to intervene.
And that's a good idea because sometimes it can be easy just to say, oh, you're back there. I can do what I want on Saturday. But maybe saying one day, hey, let's call up John and meet in person. Let's, encouraging that. They're not just so set in that way. Those are good ideas, Tom.
Absolutely. If you have time, organize it yourself. Why don't you call your friends and I'll take 2 or 3 of you and go to the movies and hang out and I'll come back and pick you up, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Just something where you're really making it hard for them to say no.
Hard for them to say no. Yes. Yeah. Putting a little cherry on top, right? Those are great recommendations. Well, I really appreciate your insight on this topic this evening. And I think a lot of listeners are going to benefit and get some great ideas and tips they can incorporate into their own families surrounding the topic of gaming. And I know you are an expert in many areas and a very well-respected psychologist. So I have no doubt you will be a regular guest here on the podcast.
Oh, anytime.
And we'll be bringing you back. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in today, friends. We appreciate your time and attention and hope you can share this podcast with someone you love or care about. Until next time, remember to live on the bright side of life, like the sunflower who chooses to face the sun. Take care, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.